Hey, this is Dave from MetalEpidemic.com. Thank you for checking out our YouTube video. Please feel free to hit the subscribe button below if you like this type of content, and we hope you enjoy the review. What's up guys, Dave here from Metal Epidemic, back with another album review. For this review, Duncan Kyle and I have been checking out the new album from electronic multi-instrumentalist GosT. GosT's new album, Rites of Love and Reverence, will be released on August 13th via Century Media Records. So, album number 6 from GosT.
He's been busy.
What the fuck? I remember when we were chatting about Behemoth. We were like, oh, I checked out Behemoth, the new GosT album.
That was number 2, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Like we saw him on that tour, didn't we? So he's been a busy guy.
He has, yeah. This is his second album on Century Media Records. And again, vocals and instrumentation are being handled by the man himself. We did a little reaction video actually to one of the singles from the album, Coven. And we mentioned obviously a bit about our past history with GosT on that video. We've obviously been aware of the band or of GosT since back in 2015 when Behemoth came out. That was our kind of introduction to the band. We saw him live not long after that. But it's safe to say that GosT isn't really an artist that you can really fully predict, what each album is going to sound like.
Which I love about him.
Yeah, there's a noticeable difference from album to album, from like going from your kind of dark electro vibes on Behemoth to the more kind of digi kind of metal tones on Possessor even, and then playing with kind of like black metal and post punk and synth pop on Valediction. It's like, but as you said, I really like that about GosT. I like the fact I've no idea where he's going to go next. Mm-hmm. And again, on Rites of Love and Reverence, he's brought in some more new sounds and ideas.
He's goth as fuck, and I love it.
He is goth as fuck. This one is 10 tracks in length, clocks in about 45 minutes long, which is fairly typical for a GosT album. His albums are always around that kind of 40 to 45 minute runtime, which I think he's got down to a fine art at this point. I think he's very aware of like when it becomes too much, and he's got it bang on the money on this release. The tracks never really bleed over that kind of 5 minute mark, so they never really feel like they're dragging. And the album length kind of as a whole is perfect for this style. Musically, I think this could be one of GosT's most accessible albums, in my opinion.
100%, yeah.
100%, nice. On past albums, we've had like really penetrating kind of moments of like black metal, really dark and ominous moments, or really like chaotic and like intense electronic sounds. And this album still has like moments of like ferocity, but it's balanced out way more on this release than I've heard in the past. Again, we've got the kind of Retrowave and the Darkwave elements at the kind of core of a lot of this, but it's woven with moments of industrial and post-punk and Retro-Rock. There's a touch of new wave in here as well. 100%, especially in some of the vocals. Yep. I want to start at the beginning though. The album starts with a kind of eerie build-up of like synths and there's some there's female vocals. I'm not sure if that's someone he's brought in or if they were sampled.
I thought it was sampled.
Right, okay.
It sounded sampled.
Yeah, I wasn't quite sure. You've got a kind of like a pulsating kind of bass drum in the background that's kind of getting faster and faster, and then it kicks right into track 2, Bound by the Horror, and you just get hit with this like crushing wave of distorted synths and like just chest caving drums. I got absolute goosebumps when that kicked in on that second track. It's so like abrasive and ugly sounding, but it grabs your attention like nothing else after that intro track. And that particular tone continues for pretty much the whole track, but we also get the addition of vocals from James himself, which it's something we've started to get a lot more of recently, especially on the last album, Valediction. And for me, his style is on this album, and it reminded me of like 80s new wave, but in a kind of dark and kind of gloomy way, almost like and don't take this the wrong way, but like a mix of like Marilyn Manson meets Jay Gordon. Like that's what I was kind of hearing.
I had my Brundle flying machine had created it was Gary Numan, right? Because there's elements of Gary Newman in there. Pete Steele from Typo Negative, because there are huge elements in Marilyn Manson.
Yep.
So it exists somewhere. If you mix those three vocals together, that's kind of what you get. It's not too bassy in the mix. It's a bit higher in the vocal range, but there are whole moments here that sound very Marilyn Manson-esque.
Yeah.
And other bits that totally reminded me of Gary Newman. But the lyrical content is Typo Negative. I don't know what's going on, but I love it all.
Yeah, and it's a very clever idea to start to do more of this on his albums, because I think he has a really likeable tone. I think it fits unbelievably well with a lot of the kind of 80s sounds he uses on his albums. And this album for me could be one of the most like outright 80s influenced albums he's done so far. Right after Bound by the Horror, we're into a track called The Fear, which is just like overflowing with these 80s synths and melodies. Albeit they are way more fucked up than anything you heard in the 80s, but he's still like, he manages to keep that kind of GosT kind of trademark still flowing through this. The tracks will often start quite traditional, and then it starts to kind of stir in something more groove heavy with like that kind of distorted bass and really kind of harsh drums. Those kind of sinister kind of string sounds that he uses as well. They were on the earlier albums as well, but that kind of stuff starts to reoccur in a lot of the tracks. There was a track called A Fleeting Whisper, which I thought was a kind of great example of a track which starts very kind of had like a kind of new wave kind of disco beat to begin with, very kind of Cure-esque like guitar leads in the background, but it's delivered in a very GosT manner. Like the drums are really punchy and quite digital sounding. There's a ton of this kind of like murky Darkwave synth work going on in the background, and again the vocals and lyrics from James add another hook to the whole thing. I also heard a lot more industrial influences coming through in this release, which he's kind of touched on ever so slightly in the past, but not as much as he's done on this album, and I think it's a great inclusion. I think it works really well against the kind of post-punk and retro sounds of this album. I'd love to hear him continue experiment with that more in the future. I think he's left scope to expand on it even more. I think my favourite moment of the album was Embrace the Blade.
It's a bitchin' track.
So good. I thought that was the one track that, there was lots of tracks that stood out, but this one really stood out for me. And it's actually one of the almost kind of more restrained tracks of the album. Has a really interesting kind of guitar tone that adds this kind of layer of kind of thickness to it.
Very Typo Negative, Dave. I'm going to get you in a Typo Negative. You give me enough time, I'm going to get you to admit you like Typo Negative.
It's got a bit of kind of like that kind of new wave lead work again with the 80s synth sounds, but it's got a kind of blanket of like an almost like shoegaze kind of atmosphere to it, and I think it was that really grabbed my attention, that kind of balanced contrast of light and dark. It finishes in like customary GosT fashion where it gets really intense, but the formula on that track worked really well. The album did not finish in the way I was expecting at all. If you look at previous albums, he tends to end with something fairly like unharmonious, like the Behemoth was like the title track. Possessor, I think, was a track called Commandment, which both very in your face. This was the opposite of that. You know, there's acoustic guitars and strings and atmospheric sounds, really kind of spacey, clean vocals. It was just so different to what I was expecting. It does like evolve into something more reminiscent of typical GosT, but still not as full on as you'd expect. So it definitely caught me off guard, but in a really good way. Duncan, what did you think of this new GosT album? Were you as excited about it as I was?
Yeah, so like I'm a big fan. I've been a big fan pretty much since the very first time we heard him.
Yeah.
And I've kept a kind of curious eye on his progress since. And to me, the biggest selling point of him as a musician is he's ever changing and ever evolving. His look changes. He's a guy that really puts a lot of effort into the transformation in between albums.
Yeah.
The only band that I can liken to in kind of modern times is the not musically sounding, but they aptly add one more letter in, and you've got the name GosT. GosT do exactly the same. When they finish an album and finish a touring cycle, they retire the singer's attire pretty much, and then they go away. And the album that you get next sounds like them, but it's a different sound.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They either go more poppier, or they go more proggy with the kind of 70s stuff with the organ and whatnot. But they do that. GosT is exactly the same. I feel that when he's finished doing his touring on his album, whatever the tone and themes he wants to experiment with bleed through to how he starts to dress, the way his digital marking particularly changes in scope. This one's all about witches, and it's all gothy, which, I mean, if it wasn't 29 degrees in Scotland right now, I would have been dripping head to toe in black robes, because that's kind of how I want to dress when I listen to this. But it's very difficult. There's nothing more depressing than listening to goth tunes when it's sunny outside. It's like literally the worst thing in the world.
Yeah. The poor goths in this weather.
They're dying.
Really?
Someone think of the goths.
I know.
I've been putting out little dog bowls of water for them at the front door, just so they can keep hydrated. I like... I'm going to hell for that. No, there's a ton of stuff on here which, once again, is right up my alley. Dave mentioned New Wave. I mean, I don't know if we talk about it as much where we come from musically, but I grew up in a New Wave house. Like, that's what my mum was listening to when I was a kid. So it was part of the reason I got interested in synthesizers when I did. And like there are a lot of musicians and bands from that time period still on my iPod that I go back to every now and again for a little listen. But he mixes it in really interestingly. It's not just even the vocals; it's the kind of synth motifs that he brings in. And I think you're right; he warps them just slightly, whether it's playing a note which feels almost in the minor to what you would expect to sound, because it sounds really happy, and then a chord transition goes into the minor, and you're like, oh like, that sounds sinister. And he does that a lot. I love it. I think it works really well for him. I think the addition of him doing more vocals, I think, benefits what he does. The reason I think that is he's now several years into his playing. His live shows predominantly him standing behind a laptop and a synth. You give me the extra element of a microphone, because he was slam dancing when we saw him. You're really fucking into it when the hard shit's going on. Having that visual aspect in the front of any performance with vocals, I think, helps. And I think him bringing more of his personality into the sound through his vocals helps. He's got a great tone. He's got a great. It's not particularly always on key, but I think that's what he's aiming for. And to be honest, the kind of new wave stuff that we're speaking about from the 80s always kind of sounded a little bit of key anyway. It's part of its charm. The collection of songs, though, I think are brilliant. He does have a tendency to get a very abrasive by the end. It's kind of, I like it as his stamp on how he finishes a track.
Yeah.
But there are whole sections here that sound unlike anything you've heard him do before. He's really experimenting and nailing that experimentation. And with you, Embrace the Blade, the guitars are typo negative to fuck, and oh my god, I love it so much. But the beauty of that track is it starts to get that kind of ghosty, abrasive way, and then Coven kicks in, and I'm like, yes, which was the single we reacted to, which actually at the time we were like, that this sounds really different. It's maybe the heaviest thing overall on the release, which is really interesting, because I expected that to be the more accommodating song and everything else to be a bit more GosT-like, but it's not. I think he's I genuinely think this might be not even just the most accessible thing that he's done. I think this is my favourite thing he's done. I think this is the one where I start to actually get an idea of who he is and the themes he's playing with. I love the artwork. The artwork's got this trippy kind of almost 50s hammer horror kind of witchy sort of image on it. I love it. It's psychedelic as fuck, and it's so cool. But the track names fit just as good as they've always done, and if not better. I know you were talking about the Burning Time, which is the final track. Do you kind of felt like, oh, right, well, where are we going with this? And it's a bit more vulnerable and it's a bit more stripped back. Well, Burning Time is a way, you know, to... it's used in exorcisms, but it's also used as a way, like, it's almost like incense in a ceremony. So that kind of made sense to me, that we're building up from this quiet, we're lighting the time up and building into something. It is genuinely a really engaging and a very, very Moorish listen. Like, I've listened to this a lot, and probably will right through at the end of the year. I think he has hit the brief spot on. If what he was wanting was something a bit more dark, a bit more vulnerable, and a bit more witchy, he's nailed it with this release. And once again, proved to me why he's apart from the rest of those guys that are doing the kind of electronic or the industrial or the synthwavy stuff, that he gets lumped in with a lot. Like, it's interesting to see, because when we saw him on tour, he was touring with Perturbator. Perturbator, if anything, has went more in line with how you kind of thought GosT would go back then. So he's followed that natural trend of being a guy that experiments with the more kind of the metal side of things, that kind of fetishism of kind of the metal culture and metal sound, while still being very synthwave. And GosT hasn't went down that road at all. He's went the other way. He's explored some of the darker, harsher sounds, and then come back with something which is interesting, challenging, rewarding, and commercial as fuck. So I love this. I think he's done incredibly well. If he tours over in Scotland, we will be going to see him. As soon as he gets some t-shirts up online, buddy. As soon as I was listening, I was like, it's all the old merch that's up there just now. And whilst I like that, I want the witchy shit. If he releases a druidic robe for this album release, and it costs like £100, I will buy that. Even if I can only wear it at night time in the room that I record for podcasting from now on, I will wear that shit. I'm just letting you know. Yeah, this is fucking great. I can't say enough good things about it. I loved it.
Nice. Kyle?
Yeah, it's an album I listen to. Quite a lot.
And
I liked it quite a lot.
You fuck off, Kyle. You pish.
All right, fuck off. All right, see you later. I thought the vocal was good, was great. It was a bit more like VMV Nation, A-pop taking berserk kind of direction for me, where it came from. It sounded a lot more like that, a bit like Assemblage 23 and that kind of stuff, all that EBM shit that was really popular like 10, 15 years ago.
That you danced like a madman to.
I did, yeah.
And your new rock boots that almost crippled you while you walked. I know, I was there as well, buddy. I was there as well.
Probably bumped into each other ass to ass.
Hopefully.
Disclosed. Anyway. No, I mean, this album, it stays true to his influences, but he's definitely got an individual sort of flair and style that is rubbed all over this. Just every inch is covered in him, but it's definitely still... You can tell where he's coming from, absolutely. There's some really unexpected, like, rhythmical and instrumentation choices that I really appreciated in the first couple of songs especially. It was like, oh, cool. That's a really good way to use that bass synth when it's, like, rolling over the top of everything else. It was really cool. I've never heard anything like that quite before. So I was like, and it worked as well. It wasn't just, like, something that stuck out. Like, it didn't fucking work, did it? Why did you do that? No, it was completely the opposite. Worked and worked and worked and worked. A lot of the rhythms is like really driving, and of course it's all electronic. I'm not going to mention anything about that, but it's like it's all the rhythms are very driving when they need to be, and then they calm down when they need to be as well. The experimentation I've said with the synthesizers, like he's not just picking a patch and just running with it. He's twisting all the knobs, doing all the stuff, and plugging one thing into something it probably shouldn't be plugged into. Definitely giving us a great variation in sounds from song to song, and even in between the songs too. Like some parts are a bit louder and quieter, and the dynamics on this album are really good. There's like a lot to take in, so you've got to listen to it a few times. The first listen I was like, honestly, a little bit overwhelmed. I was like, well, there's a lot to take in on this, but as you get through it and you get used to it, it works and flows together super well, so I really enjoyed it. But saying that, some of the parts, like the drums, he should have like toned them down a little bit when songs go from like a harder part to a quieter part.
Not what we're doing, like, GosT. You turn them up. Kyle, you turn them up.
Yeah, but you turn them up when it's all intense, and then when it calms down again, some of the drums are like, "Oh, you should have just turned it down a little bit or change your thing."
Louder.
See, live, Kyle, it just hits you right here.
Oh, yeah.
It is honestly, it's like the drum kit is in your chest.
Yeah, I can imagine it is. It's electric kit, so it's engineered to do exactly that.
Yeah,
which is great. I love that kind of stuff. But that was the only thing for me. It was only on one part of one song, and it just stuck out like, oh, I would have just done that a little bit differently. But that's it. That's the rest of it I love, especially, I know you've mentioned it already, but Embrace the Blade, that song, man, fucking, I could not believe that was a song that was written, produced, and put out to the public without a fucking warning on it, saying, parental advisory, you might get a boner,
You will. Not you, mate.
Holy crap, man. It was unbelievable. I was like, this is what I'm here for. Thank you very much, GosT.
Change the name of your cock to the Blade and embrace it.
I'm going to do that. I need to call my tattooist. Right. I'll see you next week. I'll be like, sorry, I can't walk very much this week. Sitting down's a bit difficult. I can't believe this is this dude's 6th album. Usually around album 6, people start to suck and just throw, money at it and hope something sticks. But no, this is really starting to come way into his own, especially with the vocal stuff. I know it wasn't on every song and it was only here and there parts, but the parts it was on was great. And I appreciate when you don't go all in on vocals and it's all over everything, because then you can really play with song structure and bringing more elements in and out like you did, and it's great. So I really, really enjoyed it. I think if you missed this album this year, then you're doing yourself a disservice. So
for sure,
absolutely, you've got to check it out.
Okay, so ratings for Rites of Love and Reverence. As I said earlier, I think this is like more accessible than his previous work. Still very much a GosT album, but more refined and stylistically more balanced. I think on his last couple of albums there were moments that really stood out because they were so kind of jarring. This time that there is slightly less of that, but I think it makes it an easier album to digest, especially for people who have never heard GosT before. I also think, like you said, Duncan, at this stage in his career, he's starting to distance himself more from the pack. Like back in 2015, 2016, he was getting compared to Dan Terminus and Perturbator and Carpenter Brut, but I think it's getting harder and harder to make that comparison now, because he's evolving as an artist and moulding his own identity within that scene. I think this is a step up from Valediction, both in terms of songwriting and ballads and styles. I've already listened to this way more times than I did when Valediction came out, and I can see myself going back to this a lot this year. It's a high scorer for me. Probably go 4.5 out of 5 for this one. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Duncan, what are you thinking?
I'm 100% with you. The only reason I'm not giving it a 5 is I think he has something in him
100%.
still to come out that is going to be like, it's going to be the album that will define not only his body of work, but people are going to look back on and say, well, that's a definitive moment of when a new genre of whatever the fuck it is he does spins out. What I love about GosT is that I still think people are trying to figure him out. There's not a wave of people trying to do what he's doing, because I think he doesn't stick around doing one thing long enough that people can not only pigeonhole him, but get a handle on his sound, and that's exciting to me. It reminds me in a lot of respects to Nine Inch Nails. Just when you thought you ever had a handle on what Trent Reznor and his band sounded like, the next album would be different, whether it was, far more kind of, far more electronic and, with the drums and all the rest, or moments like With Teeth when that came back, and it was this really stripped back, more rock sounding album from a guy who'd kind of not been that. I think that's what GosT does. I think he does it better than anyone. So I am not saying that at the end of the year I will not be saying, when we do like a top 20 list, that I am a fool and I should have given it a 5. There is absolutely every chance that'll come up. This is his best album. His best album. I think the word that describes what you were trying to describe is, this album is cohesive. There's no moment in this album where a song comes at you, well, that just sounds completely different to, and all these other albums have that. This is the one that feels most cohesive, of vision, sound, and style. There's a through thought all the way right through this one, and it's fucking bitchin'. 4.5 out of 5. If I could give it 4.75, I would, but Dave is frowning at me, which means the little symbol that he puts up in the video only does 0.5s. So there we go. Cost too much for a 7.
There's no 7 in that font, sorry.
So, yeah, 4.5.
Okay, and Kyle?
I'm coming in with the same as you guys for 4.5, yeah.
Nice.
Great, fantastic.
Awesome.
Can't say anything else that you haven't already said, so thanks a fucking lot.
That's why I speak so much.
So I don't have to.
True. Rites of Love and Reverence, out August 13th on Century Media Records. Check them out, facebook.com/GosT1980s. I'll put a link in the description below to their Facebook and the pre-order pre-save for the album so you can check it out. Let us know what you think. If you've heard any of the tracks, drop some comments in below. Happy to hear your thoughts and opinions on it. That is the review. Thank you so much for checking it out. Much appreciated. We'll be back with another review very soon, but until then, take care. Speak to you soon.
We'd all wear Druidic robes, wouldn't we, if he released them?
100%.
Yeah.
We could be our own coven. A coven of 3. That's how it works. Just saying. Right, bye, everyone. Bye.
Bye.